Here on a Friday, Carol Massar,
Yeah.
the stocks once again are in the green across the board.
And first of all, Scarlett, I'm so glad you got the memo on wearing red. I'm a little upset with you, Alix, and a little bit upset with you, Romaine. But having said that,
Did you lose our numbers or something? You couldn't have just texted us? Yeah.
I don't know. I'm looking at home builders. They're actually higher today, right? Some weak housing data, and nonetheless, we see that move. Some optimism as we head into the weekend, and I feel like what's going to be maybe a big week next week.
That's right. S&P 500 on pace for its best week of the year. Of course, we've been talking all day about that, but when you look from the low that we had earlier this month, the S&P 500's added about $3 trillion in market value, Scarlett.
There is a little bit still of people kind of taking a breather after what we saw this week, but I definitely felt at this start of today's trading day that it wouldn't be surprising if you saw things kind of drift lower into the close because of so many big events next week, whether it's the Fed minutes or Jerome Powell's speech or even the Bank of Japan governor's speech coming up on Thursday night, Friday morning.
Also, guys, volume is really terrible.
Yeah.
It's like, if you look at S&P volume is like down 21% versus the 10-day moving average. So like, I mean, let's be honest, there's not a lot of people trading right now.
There was nobody on the subway platform this morning. Nobody.
Yeah.
The telltale
It's
sign.
thin.
Yeah.
All right,
Summer
well, a lot of
Friday.
big moves here across the market space. Of course, a big week for yields, a big week for the dollar, and of course, a big week for stocks, too. Not quite how I think a lot of people thought this week would shape up, but this is what you have. 5 straight days of gains, 7 straight sessions, really going back to last week. And that continues today. 100 points higher on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, or about 0.2%. A similar percentage gain for the S&P 500, as well as the Nasdaq Composite. And the Russell 2000 is going to finish the day higher by about 6 points, or 0.3%. All the major indices higher on a weekly basis.
All right, back to the S&P 500 I go, and 319 names, guys, in the index posting gains in today's session. 180, Scarlett, to the downside, 4 unchanged.
All right, let's take a look at how the sector performances shake out because on the face of it, it is a mixed day with modest advances in the S&P 500, in the Dow and the Nasdaq as well. So if we could pull that up, we've been having a little bit of problems. It's been on a bit of a delay.
On technical day.
Okay, we don't have that right now. But you know what? If I look at the most active stocks by value, it's pretty clear that you've got a bunch of big tech names gaining. NVIDIA among them up 1.4%, for instance.
Yeah, I think who's ever in control of that went up to get ice cream upstairs, which is what we put out on Friday, which is really fair, right? Because we're coming to the end of the summer. Having said
They
that,
put out ice cream?
occasionally. You never had ice cream?
Never in my life.
That's really sad. All right.
Like Jack LaLanne.
All right.
Oh my God.
All right, on that, let's get to some of the individual gainers. Ulta Beauty, guys, up another 3% in today's session after an 11% gain yesterday. Of course, we know the news yesterday. Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway disclosing it took a new stake in Ulta, according to the 13F filing. Stock still down more than 20% year to date, but nonetheless, a gainer in today's session. Fubo, did I mess up? Can I go back to that? Did you guys do that? Yes, thank you so much. Fubo TV, some news, of course. That one just up about, 16% here. Big bump to the upside. Fox, Warner Brothers Discovery, Walt Disney blocked by a judge from launching their streaming service just 1 week before it was supposed to be rolled out. A blow for them, but a gain for Fubo TV. So that one really a pop to the upside.
What does Fubo stand for?
Fubo?
Yeah.
Fubo? I don't know.
No.
Do you all know?
No.
Come on. Really? No?
I'm going to research it, so you keep going and I'll research.
Okay, you do that. All right, Dexcom, a top gainer in the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ. It's a medical equipment company, guys. It was up about 3% today. Makes glucose monitoring systems. I'm not really quite sure why it's rallying, but nonetheless, it was an outperformer in today's session. There's been some concerns, I think, about some disappointing earnings they had back in July, but an investigation maybe a little bit into potential violations of federal securities laws. I just don't understand why it's rallying, but it is. So I thought I'd put it out there. All right.
You know what, Carol, since I'm also wearing red today, I'll take the decliners here. Going to start off with Applied Materials. It actually came off of the lows that we did see earlier, but down close to 2% today. Its worst day since August 7th. But what happened here, if you're looking at the semiconductor capital equipment company, did give a fourth quarter forecast that was in line with expectations, but unfortunately it did disappoint bullish investors who were looking for a bigger payoff when it does come none other than AI spending. Another one I'm looking at, and this is one of the top decliners here in the S&P 500, Amcor here down almost 4%, so worst day since May 3rd of 2023 here. This is a global packaging company, and it did slide after sales slowed in the latest quarter here, so it did see sales declines in both rigid rigid and flexible segments. And want to also end on Palo Alto because we're going to get an earnings update from them at the start of next week, down about 2.7%, worst day since August 5th here, but keeping a close eye on what that guidance could be for fiscal 2025 when it does report on Monday, guys.
All right, I don't know what FUBO actually means, but I think if we go with football and then condense it, I think that's a pretty good bet. But we can still work on that. Taking a look at the bond market, we saw buying all across the curve. We have yields down by about 4 basis points on the front end. But what I found so interesting as we talk about weekly moves, the 2-year yield on a weekly basis currently unchanged. So talk about that round trip. Nothing says that more clearly than the 2-year yield.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting, too. I mean, we talk about all the movements in yields. And look, I mean, we're now firmly below that 4% mark on the 10-year. And it looks like a lot of the big bets, at least if you look at that CFTC data, guys, that just came out, most people think that the trajectory is going to continue down in rates here as that Treasury buying will resume.
It's amazing. I Googled FUBO. There's nothing, right?
I told you.
It's the name of a sports network that I would name after myself. FUBO.
I like
right?
that.
If I had my own sports network.
Oh, now I get what you wrote. Now that makes more sense. I still think it's a condensed football, but go ahead.
All right, let's get to some of the stories that caught our attention. Listen, we've been talking about the weaker housing data, right? And just kind of watching that sector and what it means potentially. One story that caught our attention, if you talk about the high end of real estate, ultra luxury home sales apparently are on the rise. We're talking about $100,000 or above, on pace to set a new record, Jet.
That's right. If you're looking at the pool of potential buyers, it's still small. Top-tier billionaires have watched their wealth swell over the last few years. But of course, we do have that Bloomberg Billionaires Dollar Index here that you can look in the terminal. But now there are even more homes for them. So it's an interesting read here on the terminal.
It's like Romaine's home.
These are not homes. These are compounds.
Have you noticed we've never been invited? So I'm guessing,
You know, the Sweeney compound.
Totally.
Alex knows. He always talks about this on Bloomberg Intelligence Radio.
Oh, yeah, the Sweeney compound?
That's right.
Yeah. It's huge.
Sure today.
It's huge. I think he sold that, though.
I
So
like
never invites us,
the
though.
word compound, though. It makes clear that there's more than one building. And within some of those buildings are, I'm sure, a lot of art, pieces of art. And what's really interesting is that a lot of people are now borrowing against that art. They're using that as collateral to get some liquidity. And a lot of the banks, Bank of America, for instance, Citi, they're all like building out their art department to be able to provide that service.
I'm actually surprised that this hasn't happened more. Like, this makes perfect sense to me. Like, why wouldn't you do that? Like, you don't want to liquidate it, so why don't just get a loan against it?
Yeah, we've seen this happen in the past here. I mean, like, what kind of art are they taking? Like, can I get some of my old NFTs and leverage that? Or
maybe, to be honest.
It's the old masters kind of art.
Oh, okay.
For me.
Yeah. So,
no paint by number, okay?
But why couldn't you do NFTs? I mean, like, why couldn't at some point that be a thing?
Because they are not worth anything anymore. I am curious. I love this story for a couple reasons, too, because it gets to this idea of kind of all the levers that people of means have to pull to kind of keep spending, or at least to continue their lifestyle here in a way that people on the lower end of the spectrum don't. And not to get all serious about it, but it gets back into that conversation about a K-shaped economic recovery and why we have it.
It was something we talked about here yesterday on air about, the wealth gap that continues to, be in our society. And a lot of it starts with just basic things like being able to buy a house. And then that helps create, you get to leverage it and so on and so forth. And you're right, Romaine, the wealthy have a lot of different levers to do this with.
That's right. And Carol and I had a segment earlier talking about housing specifically and what they're seeing in that particular segment. But they called it kind of the Southern Smile. We're obviously probably not surprisingly cheaper to live down there than where we are here on the East Coast.
Can you imagine what kind of loan you can get out on a Stegosaurus?
Someone has to assess the value of that before they actually lend you money. So the other thing, Romaine, you were saying that...
So what does that mean? Somebody has to come by and touch it or something?
Exactly. The wealthy have a lot of levers to pull. They also don't have liquidity the same way that I think people of lower incomes do, right? Because all their wealth is tied up in actual assets. Yeah. So when they do have to, come up with money, yes, they can do it, but they'd have to sell, and you don't necessarily want to be forced to sell anything.
Cash poor.
But you know what helps? Not paying taxes on the loans. So it's like, that's the whole point, right? Like, if you're just going to do all these loans against the stuff you already own, you're not getting taxed on that.
Can we go get ice cream?
I just killed the chat talking about taxes.
I know, we're like, wah, wah.
Wah, wah, wah. Thanks very much, Alex.
Everyone's shoulders just slumped.